Hi, everybody. Let me just jump in to read. Can everybody hear me? Someone
We can hear
give me
you.
a thumb. All right, great. Let me just jump in to read the remote meeting script, and then we'll get into our agenda. Pursuant to Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023, this meeting will be conducted via remote means in accordance with applicable law. This means that members of the public body, as well as members of the public, may access this meeting via virtual means. Participants may access the meeting through the remote meeting link as posted on the meeting agenda and through the town's online calendar. When required by law or allowed by the chair, persons wishing to provide public comment or otherwise participate in the meeting may do so by raising their hand or otherwise signaling their intent to speak. This meeting will be recorded. Please take care to mute your microphone unless you have been recognized by the chair. We will now confirm attendance of members. Please respond with present if you're on the call. Elise Malowski.
Present.
Lucia Lopez.
Present.
Matthew Ronca. Michael King.
Present.
Parker Happ.
Present.
Jane Moran.
Present.
Karen Wills.
Present.
Vikasath Prati.
Present.
And I'm obviously here. Rob's here. So staff, John Gelsich
Present.
and Lori St. John.
Lori might not be able to make it tonight.
All right, great. All right, let's just jump into our agenda. Bear with me 1 second. All right, A&R for 66 Fruit Street. Can we get is Mr. Marquardt going to talk about this, or who's going to give us an overview? John, do you have do you know?
I think Elaine is here for that.
Elaine,
Yes,
go ahead.
thank you. So the town of Hopkinton is the applicant, and this is an A&R plan that delineates an affordable housing parcel as defined on the Food Street Master Plan. So the Food Street Master Plan showed a parcel for affordable housing, but it was never surveyed. And so this was a CPC project that was voted last year to conduct the survey, and we're presenting it for your endorsement this evening.
All right. Does anybody have any questions? I have a question. How do you actually access this property?
So right now it can be accessed via the access road that goes to the back to the Food Street field. So it's on that access road. If at some point we need to create frontage for this lot, we'll have to define it as an actual road rather than just a driveway.
Okay. Lucia, go ahead.
Thanks, Rob. In reading the Form A, it puts this as not to be considered a building lot, but then it also says it's to create the boundary of the parcel that is set aside for future affordable housing. So if this is not a building lot, then what is this doing?
So it creates the parcel for the future. And as I mentioned, access to that lot would have to be obtained also as part of that, any development that were to occur there.
Okay, so this is basically like the first step in the process.
Yeah, it just defines it as Parks and Rec, for example, develops around it. We want to make sure that we know where this is on the ground.
Okay, thank you.
Does anyone else have any questions? Seeing none, I'd like to entertain a motion that the planning board endorse the A&R plan for 66 Fruit Street entitled Plan of Land in Hopkinton, Massachusetts, prepared by J.D. Marquardt and Associates, dated November 5th, 2024.
So moved.
Second.
All right, great. Roll call vote. Elise Mayalowski,
Yes.
Lucia Lopez,
Yes.
Matthew Ronca,
Yes.
Michael King,
Yes.
Parker Hap,
Yes.
Jane Moran,
Yes.
Karen Wills,
Yes.
Vikasath Prati,
Yes.
and Rob Benson is a yes. Thanks, Elaine. Thanks for coming before us.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it. All right, we're just gonna keep moving right along here. Wilson Street stormwater. Unless I'm mistaken, John, we didn't have an update. Did I not? I don't think I saw an updated estimate for what it would cost.
We got one at the couple hours ago. So I just added to the administrative folder.
Okay.
around like 4 o'clock. So Phil from Beta is here if you want him to go through that.
I don't think anyone has seen it, but I think it makes
It's
sense
not
to go.
complex.
I think it makes sense to go through it because all we were really looking for was a number. And then I don't see Vin Gately on the call. Like
Vin is
we
on.
wanted a number to know what to adjust the bond to. So so Phil, could you go through the estimate?
Sure, yeah, it's very simple. It's obviously they're gonna saw cut the pavement at 4 feet off the edge of pavement. They're going to supplement the gravel base and pave the edge. For the first 300 or so feet, they're gonna have a berm, which will match the berm on the opposite side of the street. To protect the edge of road, and keep the water in the gutter. After that, it will. Oh, I should state that we received another plan from Peter Bemis, probably around 4:30 as well, which it actually addressed all the issues that we had talked about. But anyway, the estimate itself, it incorporates the berm, incorporates a 1 foot shoulder, and all the riprap and pavement. The pavement will match the minimum of the subdivision road, and the riprap and filter fabric according to the detail. And so the number is about $102,000 with some contingency for contract administration if needed, or miscellaneous issues that may come up. So that's what obviously is Mass DOT prices. The contractor obviously can do it maybe as much as half of that, but you know, so.
Does anyone on the board have any questions for Phil? Mr. Gately, I see you joined. Did you have any anything you'd like to add?
Yes. I think I agree with Phil. This is, as he said, Mass DOT numbers. We've put together a pretty detailed budget and have actually talked to all of our subs about this work in the last 10 days or so. So we see this as a $40,000 job all day long. So possibly 50, but certainly about half of what Phil was saying. So I would propose to since we have a bond in place for $75,000, which I think is more than adequate to cover this work, we would like to see this approved with just keeping our current bond amount in place.
To be honest, I don't know where this leaves us. We were hoping that there would be an agreed upon plan from a meeting a month ago. But nothing came of that. Now a month has gone by.
Wasn't the
Now,
last meeting 2 weeks ago?
no. We had a meeting in December where I had said I'd like to see you meet with town personnel, Phil, come up with a plan to get this addressed. That meeting happened where there was no, that meeting happened in January. There was no path forward. And now we're another month later. So we're 2 months past where I think we hit a breaking point. So what, from your point of view, what would you'd like us just to keep the bond as is? And what are you going to do in the immediate term for us to be okay with that?
Well, I mean, you have $75,000 where we're not finished up there, but we're probably 80% done with the entire job. So I think the risk to the town is pretty small at this point. Adding this in, I think this work is very well within the existing bond. And I guess I'm prepared to agree to the plan that was submitted and all the details on there as far as the scope of work, and move this forward probably in the spring. I had a chance to speak to Peter late this afternoon. I don't see him on here. He's at another hearing, but in any case, we just talked about getting this started like as soon as we think the weather is right, and we only see maybe a week, 1 week's worth of work to do this. So I guess the only thing left is just to agree on the scope of the work, which I think we do now. And then just have you people, approve the bond issue.
Does anybody on the board have any thoughts, opinions, comments, questions? Matthew, go ahead.
I hear what Mr. Gately is saying about how he could do it within his current bond, but the purpose of the bond is if the town were to have to pay and contract out the work. So I don't think that argument for keeping it at the current level makes a lot of sense. I don't know if it would make if there were a deadline that Mr. Gately and his team could provide in terms of when he thinks the weather would be ready. If it's only 1 week's worth of work, maybe that's something worth discussing as well, to have a deadline for when we'd talk about raising the bond. But given how long this has taken, I'm leaning towards raising the bond being just making sense to protect the town here.
Just speaking to the schedule, I guess Peter sent over an email to John this afternoon about having this done within the next 60 to 75 days. And he's saying if it's not completed by May 15th, that would be sort of a deadline, I guess, to get the work done. And if it's not done by that date, we'll certainly discuss increasing the bond. But
Rob, what-
this time I see it, the bond being more than adequate, almost by double, to do this work. So
one of my other concerns, Rob, is that this started with storms coming in March, and we're about to hit that season again. It's possible that the damage that needs to be addressed could be even higher.
Thanks, Matthew. John, I have a question for you. Do you have any precedents of like in the planning as the principal planner of what is normally done in these types of situations? I think I haven't seen this in my time on the board where we've come across this.
Yeah, there's usually not a ton of offsite repairs that need to be done for development, so not a lot of precedent to refer to. I will mention though that the $75,000 bond was that amount was established based on the work that was proposed under the approved site plan. This extra work wasn't part of that. So if there's any work that needs to be done as part of the overall development site, that's what that $75,000 will cover or attempt to cover. And then if there's additional work that needs to be done on Wilson Street, along with that, then I doubt that $75,000 will cover both projects.
Okay. With that being said, does anyone else on the board have any comments, questions, thoughts, opinions? Parker, go ahead.
I think based on John's astute observation that we should probably raise the bond an additional 100,000 to be safe.
Thanks, Parker. So at this time, I'd like to entertain a motion that the planning board raise the bond from 75,000 to 177,000.
am I allowed to
So
make a
moved.
comment yet?
Second,
Am I allowed to make a comment yet? Or is this, we beyond that? I'm not sure procedurally how this works.
I guess we can pause for debate where you can make a comment. Go ahead.
Yeah, my only comment is, now that we've agreed to take this on, we're gonna get this done. We've been in this town for 6 years. We're gonna get this done. And I don't want to go down the road of who's responsible. We certainly don't agree on that. But I am agreeing to get this work done and get it done in a very quick time frame. Unfortunately, this isn't the time we can actually start the work. This is not a lot of work. It really is not. It just needs the right weather. So we think by May 15th, we're completely done. And I'd like to avoid a situation where, you know, this bond is now added by another $100,000. And then I'm in a position where I'm going to appeal that, and we're going to go back and forth, and that's not going to get this work done. We're agreeing to do the work. I think we have, based on where we are right now, this is about the fastest time frame we have realistically to get the work done. And so anyways,
Through the chair.
I prefer to just get this done and within the bond.
Through the chair.
Go ahead, John.
Just to kind of maybe help Vin handle this, if this becomes a decision, you can petition the board to reduce the bond once the work is done. So the bond could be in place for, if you can do this in a couple months, the bond could be in place for a couple months, and then you can reduce it back to the 75,000 once the work is complete. So it's not like this amount has to, be in place for the life of the project, for the life of the trails project.
Yeah, no, I understand that. I understand it completely.
I think my perspective is this originally came on our agenda I'm gonna try to quickly pull it up here, but we originally got a letter from Kerry Reed 9 months ago. I went on a site walk well over 6 months ago, and we're still talking about this. I don't think any discussions have made any progress until the threat of a bond. And so that's what so we have a motion and a second on the table. So we're gonna vote and we'll see how the board votes. John, I'm right in saying we have a motion and a second, correct?
So I did not hear who the first and the second were, if there were a motion.
Rob, I made a motion. Parker made a second to the motion.
Correct.
Roll call vote. Elise Mayalowski,
Sorry, just to clarify, this is voting on to change the bond?
from
up it?
75,000
Okay.
75,000 to 177,000.
Yes, I vote yes.
Lucia Lopez,
Yes.
Matthew Ronca,
Yes.
Michael King,
Yes.
Parker Hap,
Yes.
Jane Moran,
Yes.
Karen Wills,
Yes.
Vikasath Prati,
Yes.
and Rob Benson is a yes. So hopefully the work can be done, completed. This could be a temporary problem for you, Mr. Gately, and that's what we want as a board, to get this resolved as quickly as possible.
Okay, well, look forward to seeing that decision, and we will take it from there.
All right, thank you. Next thing on our agenda, item 1.3, our meeting minutes from the February 10th, 2024 meeting. I know Lori's not on tonight, but does anybody have any comments for the meeting minutes for February 10th? Matthew, go ahead.
Yeah, I just had one comment, although I'm not sure what the specific intent was. On this discussion, actually, the stormwater damage. It says that Mr. Gately feels he's being held responsible to fix damage caused by stormwater runoff from the trails development. I assume that's intended to apply either not from the trails or from Legacy Farm North or something other than from the trails. Am I right?
Yes, yeah, it's beyond the scope of the Trails project. Is
So I'm not sure exactly how we wanted to rephrase that. I didn't have time to process that, but I guess I would modify it to say from other than the trails development, unless somebody has a better suggestion, thought more about it.
I think that's sufficient. John, is this something you can jot down?
Yeah, the meeting's also being recorded, so we have
Okay, great.
recording.
All right. Does anyone else have anything else in addition to Matthew's comments?
Oh, one other thing I realized, sorry, Rob, that he should not fix the damage that was not there before. I think also needs clarification that he didn't want to go beyond fixing.
He
Go
didn't want to go
beyond-
beyond fixing pre-existing damage. Something like that. That doesn't sound right, though.
Yeah, no, I mean, he was saying that he didn't want to build out more of the road infrastructure that wasn't caused by the damage. So something to that effect. He didn't want to feel, he felt that, and he does not feel that he should.
I think he felt like he was going to be forced to make major road improvements.
Beyond its
And-
original state.
Yeah, and it wasn't, he
There
didn't
you
feel
go.
that that was his responsibility.
Make improvements beyond the original state.
What Parker just put together. Yeah, that's my
Okay.
proposed amendment.
All right. With those suggested modifications by Matthew, I'd like to entertain a motion that to approve, the planning board approve the meeting minutes from the February 10th, 2025 meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Matthew. Roll call vote. Elise Mayalowski,
Yes.
Lucia Lopez,
Yes.
Matthew Ronka,
Yes.
Michael King,
Yes.
Parker Hap,
Yes.
Jane Moran,
Yes.
Karen Wills,
Yes.
Vikasath Prati,
Yes.
and Rob Benson is a yes. All right, we're moving right along here. Item number 2, continued public hearing 0 Benson Road, amended definitive subdivision plan, Wayne Como. Before we get
To the
started,
chair. Sorry,
Go ahead.
there's one other item on the agenda, the FEMA brick grant presentation introduction.
where
So we
Where
have
did-
Siler Climate Consulting.
where did I miss that? Oh, it's on the top, but it's not in the administrative items. Okay, sorry.
Left out of the memo. You're right.
That's why I saw Jeff Rowland on, I am assuming. Sorry about that, guys, everybody. So who's gonna be speaking to that?
Lucy,
Lucy, are
Lucy,
you
we can't
talking?
hear
I
you.
think
Any better?
Yep.
Okay, cool. Shall I just, I'm happy to share my, I have a few slides too, if I can share my
Yep.
screen and.
let me
button.
set that. There you go. You should be all set.
Okay, thanks, John. Okay. Does that
So
look good?
Rob, I can do a quick introduction if you'd like.
Yeah, that'd be
Mhm.
terrific.
So sorry, Lucy, I'm not trying to
Okay.
jump in front of you here.
Thanks.
So Hopkinton was awarded a FEMA brick grant, a building resilient infrastructure in communities, I think is what it stands for. Back a number of years, we applied for it a number of years ago. Recently, we're awarded it and have begun the process with Siler Climate Consulting on reviewing our bylaws and regulations for areas of improvement for nature-based solutions and other sustainable type of development infrastructure, ways that we can make our bylaws and regulations a little bit more consistent with those types of themes, and identify areas in our bylaws and regulations that might be kind of going the opposite direction. And so Lucy is part of Siler Climate Consulting, and she is here to give an overview of the work that we've done so far and some of the next steps, and look for input from planning board members.
Awesome. Thank you, Johnny. Appreciate it. Thanks for welcoming me to the meeting tonight. Give a quick overview of who I am, and I know you did a nice job of that and for welcoming me. Lucy Perkins, I'm the Director of Climate Resilience for Siler Climate Consulting. We're a small woman-owned firm that works with cities and towns on climate resilience planning and implementation. And we've actually already had the privilege of working with the town on their climate action plan, so are quite excited and honored to be continuing this work to review the town's bylaws and, as John mentioned, integrate climate resilience into those regulations. I think it's emerged in this moment for a couple of different reasons. One is with an awareness of impacts from flooding in town, also knowing there's a desire to better integrate resilience into regulations beyond just the stormwater regs, where a lot of that work is happening now. So broadening those mechanisms for implementation. And also, this is an effort to advance some of the recommendations from the Climate Action Plan. We heard a major priority of the Sustainable Green Committee and Conservation Committee was to advance some of those policy and bylaw review ideas. So this work is really putting that into practice. The goals for my quick presentation for you all today is to first really do some context setting, so build an understanding of climate impacts, the way that land use patterns can affect those impacts, and some of the nature-based solutions that are emerging and already being implemented in the region. An overview of our project, the purpose of the work, the scope of the work that's ahead, and some of the next steps and what we've accomplished to date. And then, as John mentioned, outlining some of those future engagement opportunities where we're really hoping to bring planning board members as well as other key stakeholders, implementation partners, and residents in Hopkinton into the process to help us shape the report and some of the recommendations that will come out of our work. So I think just to ground us all quickly, and this may be well-known knowledge for many of you, but to root it in some of the climate impacts that we're already experiencing, and contextualize some of the changes that I'm recommending in what we are observing, studying, and noticing with climate change in the region. In 2022, Massachusetts completed a series of regional climate assessments that work really well to summarize some of the most urgent ways in which each part of the state is vulnerable to risks and hazards, now and in the future, and across several different sectors, thinking about infrastructure, economy, social and human systems, governance, and the natural environment. And what I wanted to do was specifically highlight two of those impacts as they particularly relate to the project at hand. So the first you can see is around freshwater ecosystem degradation. So knowing that more intense and frequent storms will affect stormwater management, especially in systems that weren't designed for the volume of water that is anticipated or are already being experienced, and can lead to increased nutrient loading, sediment runoff from roadways. The second top climate impact around natural resources is related to declining forest health, and this is really because of those warming temperatures, changing precipitation patterns, increasing pest occurrence. What is possible, and there's still less uncertainty around the scale of potential loss, but that those changes in the environment can affect some tree species that have a lower capacity for adaptation. So these changes in the climate are particularly important because land use and development patterns also play a role and can compound those impacts. How we develop matters, and land use patterns play an important role to either contribute to or mitigate those climate impacts. And what you can see here is a map that was developed by Mass Audubon, and it's showing some development patterns across the state and highlighting where sprawl is already happening or sort of on the frontier with the hash marks. These are places where development looks like less dense housing on higher acreage lots. I think the helpful key takeaway from this idea in this slide is that really what lies in the opportunity, and that there's a potential and a possibility to encourage development to work with the landscape and with natural features, and encourage development that therefore clusters houses at higher density on smaller lot sizes and along narrow roadways, and the idea to really preserve existing mature vegetation, better connect natural spaces, and reduce impervious surfaces. So it's sort of bringing together and trying to harness the potential and the power of those land use development patterns, regulations, bylaws, to think about how we can develop in a smart and sustainable way. And some of the specific practices there are around knowing that nature can do the work. So the purpose of this slide here is really just to ground us in some shared definitions of core concepts that our work integrates. They'll be helpful in some of the technical conversations that probably will follow in subsequent project meetings and updates. So the first is around nature-based solutions. Many of you may already be familiar with this. A nature-based solution is an action that incorporates natural features and processes to protect, conserve, restore, sustainably use, and manage natural or modified ecosystems to address socio-environmental challenges while providing measurable co-benefits to and benefit both people and nature. That's sort of often considered the all-encompassing term. And then from there, you may have heard green infrastructure. These are tools that leverage nature to do the job of infrastructure. So an example might be replacing a retention basin with bioretention cells or bioswales, which are sort of vegetated landscape depressions that can help capture, treat, and infiltrate stormwater. You might see them in a parking lot or in a roadway. And the other term is often referred to as low impact development. I think this tends to be more of the engineered solution, where green infrastructure is more of the natural system. Low impact development is considered water and land management strategy that mimics natural conditions to support local ecosystems. So you've probably seen these already implemented in the region or in the area. As I mentioned, they might look like bioswales. Perhaps you've seen permeable pavements, even culvert replacements or street trees that mitigate urban heat island effect and stormwater benefits. These are all examples of what nature-based solutions can look like when they're integrated into development. There are a couple other ways to think about nature-based solutions and the effects that they can have, or the purpose of their integration into development. The first is thinking about conservation. So this is using nature-based solutions to prioritize land conservation and stewardship in ways that maximize benefit for both people and nature, and focus development around existing infrastructure. The takeaway here is really that strategic conservation is a great place and a smart place to start for climate resilience. The second mechanism is thinking about integrating these solutions to improve project siting and design, as well as to retrofit existing development to mitigate impacts through the addition of trees or other natural features and the reduction of impervious surfaces. I think what's helpful here is to think about just a recognition that development is an essential part of our community. So it's important to identify those opportunities to improve siting and design, both of new development, but also retrofitting existing development to reduce its impact through the integration of these natural features. And this is a photo from Mass Audubon's Meadowbrook Wildlife Sanctuary with a bioswale there. And the third sort of technique is thinking about restoration. So converting abandoned or repeatedly flooded waterway buffers into reforested areas or parks, upgrading those undersized culverts, incorporating rain gardens, trees, or other green features into existing urban areas. So one of the questions is, why would we do this? There are a lot of benefits of nature-based solutions. Some of them are highlighted here. The first being avoided costs. So reducing the burden on municipal infrastructure. I mentioned earlier that because of increased volume of precipitation and runoff, that can really stress and burden existing infrastructure systems that weren't built for that volume. So nature-based solutions can effectively reduce that burden on infrastructure and really make a fiscally responsible investment. The second benefit is around hazard reduction, reducing flood impacts, improving public safety by integrating these features that can absorb rainwater and mitigate stormwater runoff. I know this is something that the town experiences and deals with, so it's a helpful, one of the mechanisms or solutions to reduce those flooding impacts. And then the third one is a bit of a catch-all, but recognizing that there are other co-benefits to the implementation of nature-based solutions. They can improve habitat restoration, nutrient reduction, water filtration, carbon sequestration, air purification, and also provide recreational opportunities. That's just scratching the surface, but there are a lot of associated benefits that follow from climate resilience land use patterns and practices. That's a lot of background information. I think let's dive into sort of the scope of services and the work itself. Overall, this is really a pretty straightforward project and scope of work, not to undermine really the rigor that we're going about it with. The team, we are very lucky to be working with a core team of staff from the town. So John from planning, we also have folks from Public Works, Sustainability, the Conservation Administrator, the Hazard Mitigation Grants Administrator, the Town Engineer, Construction Inspector are all working alongside us in this sort of core team advisory function. As I mentioned before, the goal of our group really focuses on evaluating the town's existing regulatory landscape, identifying those opportunities to update and strengthen regulations, while engaging really all of community to create solutions that are actionable, make sense, and locally and right-sized to Hopkinton itself. What you see laid out here are several of the key tasks that we are undertaking. Task 1, we finished earlier this year, that really focused on a review of existing general bylaws, zoning, subdivision regs, stormwater regs, wetland protection regulations using a methodology that I'll share in a few slides in more depth. Task 2 is what we're diving into now, and it's sort of leveraging the strong understanding that we were able to generate of gaps and opportunities in existing bylaws to build out recommendations for improvements based on some shared goals and with input from the public through a series of engagement activities, which is really what Task 3 focuses on. And then ultimately at the end of this work, Task 4 and 5 is making progress towards the development of a final report with a set of recommendations that will help improve the bylaws from both a sustainability and a resilience perspective. And that's where we plan to be there by September 2025. So part of what's really underlining our work are a series of goals that were agreed upon by that core team and enhanced. There are a lot here. I think the important things to highlight are upgrading that general regulatory context, protecting soils and soil ecosystems, as I mentioned, really facilitating the adoption of green infrastructure, low impact development, nature-based solutions, having an awareness of reducing impervious surfaces and really trying to mainstream pervious surfaces, promoting sustainable development, enhancing those ecosystem benefits, services, and co-benefits. And then the two that really came through some of our initial conversations with the core team was this idea of centering people and equity in the process. So thinking about both the what, the substance regulations, but also the process of updating those bylaws, knowing that there are really deep connections between the well-being of human systems and ecosystems. And then the second one is around stewarding public money for infrastructure improvements. That's sort of teeing back into that fiscal responsibility, having a view of minimizing fiscal impacts to the town by considering short-term and long-term costs and benefits in the context of a changing climate. So I mentioned I'd get a little more in depth into the methodology itself. I think what's important is that we are not really reinventing the wheel here. There are some fantastic, strong, rigorous tools and models that exist to conduct a bylaw review thoroughly that have been developed by different partners in the region and across the state. What you see here is a tool created by Mass Audubon that we've been using. They have a bylaw review tool. You can use it to go through all of the bylaws to categorize existing regulations and identify where Hopkinton's language or approach is considered conventional. That's that orange column, which means the town is currently implementing sort of the common bylaw or regulation requirements. Maybe it's doing better, so there's an improvement beyond those common practices, or perhaps existing bylaws are considered best or best practice. It's a place where the town is already a leader for utilizing that best practice. The way the tool is set up is there are a couple goals. Each goal has several rows underneath it. You can see a few of them listed here that highlights a specific consideration, gives an example of each of those categories, and then you can use the tool to compare to language that's currently in the regs and assess if what exists is considered conventional, better, or best. So then the output ends up being a sort of color-coded tool that you can use to start to figure out what's more outdated, where can we do a better job of encouraging nature-based solutions, and where are there opportunities for improvement. This is a very high-level overview of some of the findings from that initial review. We can provide more detail if that would be helpful, but what I did was pull out those goals in the tool and try to sort of summarize where the existing bylaws stand in that categorization. So protecting natural resource and open space tends to be in the better column. Promoting efficient compact development patterns and infill is really more conventional. Smart designs that reduce overall imperviousness, straddling between conventional and better, and so on and so forth. What I thought might be helpful to give you an idea of what this really looks like in practice is to give an example of a place where we identified the existing bylaw as conventional. So an example of a deficiency and an example of a best practice where Hopkinton was rated in that best category. So an example of a deficiency that we identified is around encouraging smart designs that reduce overall imperviousness. This example really relates to road width. Hopkinton currently regulates road widths and subdivisions. You probably all know this by the back of your hand, 24 to 30 feet across major and minor road categories. An improvement that Mass Audubon recommends is to create wide, medium, and narrow categories that are 22 to 24 feet across maximum with a 2-foot shoulder. So they give existing language recommendations that could help move up along that scale. And an example of a best practice is around adopting green infrastructure stormwater management provisions. The regs require as-built plans and drawings upon completion of work. In fact, the conventional practice does not even address as-built plans. The better approach recommends them. The best approach requires them. So we did this very thorough review. We also, alongside that review, did some best practice research and started to identify other towns with language that currently exists where they're implementing a best practice. Framingham requires developers and designers to minimize impact on natural development through their zoning regs. We can give a couple of other examples of towns like Northampton, Franklin, Westwood are considered models in subdivision regs, site plan review, and stormwater bylaws, sort of respectively. So those are helpful places to pull from as we keep our work moving forward. The next step of the work, this is really where we're going to dig in after our meeting tonight, is in building out this prioritization matrix. The purpose of this is to harness that knowledge that we just developed through the review and some of that best practice research to focus in on some of the areas for improvement and move towards those best practices, and build out some detailed language, characterizations, and pathways to implementation to hopefully equip you all with this really useful tool that says, here's where to start, here's some existing language and examples that exist in the state. Again, we're not reinventing the wheel here, but I think we're taking fresh eyes and adapting it to what we know about the local context. This model comes from Clinton, but what we've done is make some tweaks and tailored changes to the tool itself as it lives in an Excel document that reflect the community's priorities, what we've seen in different planning documents, and how we know updates and regulations move through different processes. The idea is that we'll equip you something that's very actionable. And just to orient you to what you're seeing here and what we'll be building out, sort of each row will be a specific recommendation. They'll have a strategy. Those impact categories, stormwater management, smart growth, floodplain mitigation, public safety, have been pulled out of those community priorities. So these are ways that you can evaluate the impact of each update. We talk about the implementation pathway. Does it need to go through town meeting, planning board, sort of who's required to help move this recommendation forward? We also identify the procedural complexity. Is this change low-hanging fruit? Will it take a lot of effort and additional study, more work in order to implement? And sort of the degree of change from the current bylaw. Is this a small change with minimal impact, but still a step forward? Or is this a larger change? Are you moving maybe from conventional to best and stepping beyond that better category? And some other notes. What you see here is just an example from Clinton, but what we'll do is go through each of the goals and provide really specific recommendations that we hope built in this matrix will help you figure out where to start. And then finally, I just wanted to walk through the public engagement component of this work so you can see who else we'll be talking to, maybe identify if there are any gaps here, and also see how you each fit into this work. So what this pulls out are sort of 4 key nodes of engagement that we're thinking about. As I mentioned, there's that core project team. These are town staff who participate in a kickoff meeting. We'll be bringing them back together in a second meeting to review the draft report and recommendations. Yourselves, the planning board, and hopefully some other zoning advisory committee members are receiving this public presentation. We then plan to have more of a roundtable for really deep engagement with some of the recommendations, making sure that what we're proposing makes sense, can be implemented, is leveraging and really pulling those mechanisms and tools that exist in town. So reviewing the draft report. We also want to do some work and really engage the Hopkinton community, both through some online printed tools like an online story map that can provide helpful information, probably some of the background that I provided earlier tonight, project updates, and then host more of an open house that can invite folks in to be part of shaping of the draft report and recommendations. And then finally, I think this is one of the more strategic components of this work, but really trying to identify who are those implementation partners that are important to have alongside us as we develop the recommendations. So there's shared ownership, shared responsibility, buy-in, support, maybe local champions who can help move it forward beyond the end of the close of the project. So our hope is to have individual roundtables with Conservation Commission, Sustainable Green Committee, Chamber of Commerce to review those report and recommendations, and then had a really thoughtful idea to target outreach to HOAs to increase their capacity for implementation. So just thinking about who are those key stakeholders and partners that can move this from idea to concept and practice, and engaging them in the process to make sure that everything is right-sized and localized to be the most impactful. So that's really what's ahead for the next few months between now and September. So that's all I have. I did have a few discussion questions if we have time, just to garner some feedback and insights from planning board members, because you have some local expertise that I don't have and would love to learn from. But I'll pause there before offering those and maybe turn it back over to you to see what's a good next step.
Thanks, Lucy. I think we do have time for some discussion questions because
Okay.
I think this is a very worthy discussion topic for us as a board. But I had one question to kick us off. by being a FEMA brick grant, is the charter to try to come up with zoning or other means to prevent effects of an emergency like weather event, or is it really to just try to develop best practices to preserve the environment to minimize climate change, or both?
So through the chair, I could probably answer that. So
Go ahead, Jeff.
this is for, so since it's FEMA, it has to have a emergency component, and flooding, heat days, droughts, all those types of things are considered emergencies and natural emergencies under FEMA. And so some of the work that we do will address those things. Some of them, obviously, there's nothing we can do. Coastal flooding doesn't impact us, that kind of thing. But inland flooding, high heat days, drought, snow, we see erosion from the rainfall that we're seeing, at the trails, wiping away roads and culverts and that kind of thing. So it really is geared towards mitigating the impacts of those types of events rather than climate change in general, more the extreme outcomes of climate change and the weather events that it brings is what this is focused on.
So should I think of it as things we can do to be able to handle those storm events as opposed to things to prevent the storm effects?
Yeah, it's ways to adapt to the impacts of those storm events.
Okay. All right. And so another question, how should we or how do you deal with some of the things? If they were all easy, I think they'd be just generally done very quickly. But some things like you'd mentioned in your presentation, minimizing the road width, or Mass Audubon had recommendations for road widths like min, median, and max. I forget exactly, but obviously road widths, like the narrower the road, the more risk of safety with cars passing each other. So how do you relay to constituents to think about that issue? There's for everything that's a benefit to for this, there could be a subsequent thing that might be at risk or might increase a risk of something else.
Sure, it's a great question, and I think few places I would go back to help answer it and answer those questions in conversation with constituents. Mostly the goals of this work. So finding the balance between mitigating impacts and protecting public safety. Both of those were identified. So how do we, through this process, it doesn't need to be going all the way to the best practice. You can find that better sort of categorization, but how do we right size the recommendation to balance and reflect the community priorities that we know exist and tailor the language accordingly? So I think that's part of the really thoughtful work that we have to do to make sure that the recommendations are right sized and reflecting those different considerations when they may be in tension with one another. Sometimes they might be complementary, but that's part of the work. And I think also some of the public engagement, the work with community members, with some of those key implementation partners, will help us tease out those tensions, figure out what a creative solution might be as we hold those community priorities at once, sort of in figuring out what makes sense for each of the recommendations. But I think it's a really thoughtful comment and question, and it's not an easy sort of pathway, but I think by engaging really deeply with those challenges, then you come out actually with the better solution that makes sense for each context and planning context in which they would be implemented.
All right. I appreciate that. Does anyone on the board have questions, or maybe we jump into your discussion questions and we go from there?
Rob, I have a question through the chair.
Yeah, go ahead, Karen.
Thank you. Hi, Lucy. Thank you. That was a very thoughtful presentation and was very informative. So I have a question. I don't know if this might be actually for John or Rob or you. Is this grant does it cover the work of just the assessment and the evaluation and you know, is essentially to the end of your report and the engagement of the community? Or does it actually cover also these projects being done? And just taking it to the extreme, if we said, okay, we're gonna narrow all the roads in Hopkinton, let's go. Will this grant cover that? Or what does it actually cover? If you could help me out with that, that'd be great.
Yeah, through the chair, I'll take that one too. So this is just for a review of the bylaws and the regulations.
Okay.
And so the product is a report at the end saying, here's a matrix of the things that we can do as a town to improve our bylaws and regulations to achieve these types of goals. One of them might be, if we want to reduce pavement, it's narrowing the road width. That might not even be a recommendation, right? That's just something that.
Yeah,
that's
no, I just use that as an extreme.
But, you know, an example recommendation could be changing, and this is just off the cuff, changing a type of curbing to allow for water to go into a grass swale rather than into the sewer system or something like that,
Mhm.
right? So it's those types of recommendations that we can then either pick and choose to update our zoning, update our stormwater regulations or wetland regulations or subdivision regulations to incorporate those types of things as needed.
Okay. Thank you.
Lucy, did you have some a slide to share about discussion questions? Do you just want to talk to them?
I haven't put them on a slide, so I would be happy just to sort of share them with the group and see if there's one that we feel like there's
Yeah.
the most energy or interest around.
Sure, sounds good.
Okay. One of them is just broadly like, you all are experts in all things Hopkinton, and I'm curious if there's something that didn't come up in the presentation that's really important for us to pay attention to in our work, whether that's with regard to the goals, the implementation pathway, to some of the areas of deficiency that you've even noticed through permitting and development review that we should be aware of or think about as we go forward in building out this prioritization matrix and making any recommendations. So I think tapping into the like really place-based technical expertise that you all hold that we haven't built up through years of experience in town would be fantastic to just capture a little bit before asking a more technical question.
Does anyone on the board want to start trying to answer that? So, I don't know that they're specific to Hopkins. I think these are more specific to Massachusetts or maybe the Northeast in general. I think our response to extreme weather events or extreme conditions where FEMA could be involved isn't necessarily one thing like other parts of the country might be. I think where the weather is changing, seems to be changing rapidly, and we could be in a situation where it's very dry for 6 months, and then we could be in a situation where it's very wet for a month or two, and there's extreme situations. So when it's very dry, there's the risk of fires, there's kind of forestry management and how that all maps into planning and zoning is I think something to consider. That's my only point is I think the kind of the emergency of events that could be happen in New England is many different ones. It could be anything from a dramatic snowstorm to a dramatic drought to a dramatic rain event to a hurricane like we haven't had before here in the Northeast.
Yeah.
Like those things could just happen, I'd say more so in the future than they probably could have happened decades ago.
Yeah, no, it's so true. And I think to your point of like the challenge of this work is mapping those emergency events and planning for them into sort of how we do our work, those regulations. That's what I love to do. So I'm here for the challenge. I know it's not easy. And I think part of the importance is recognizing the diversity of what those events, the forms they can take, and being considerate of each of the impacts so that I think you're prepared for the different types of hazards and risks that they can present. That's great.
Anyone else have anything to offer?
Through the
All right.
chair.
Go ahead, Lucia.
I guess the question that I had as I was listening to the presentation is if we are going with bylaws and regulations from now moving forward, is there a way to connect that to what's already existing? Because I feel like in watching your presentation, there are probably a lot of things that could be instituted that are not in the current bylaws. But if there's some way to kind of encourage the town or the residents to look at what's existing now and how we can improve upon what's already built.
Can you say a little bit more? You think an improvement upon what's already built, like existing development, or are you thinking more in terms of the regulations themselves and improving the language that exists there?
Yeah, I was thinking existing development because I
Okay.
think that for me
Yeah.
is, Hopkinton has developed so much that this will be helpful in the future, but how does that help what already exists? And is there some way to encourage improvement on what already exists in addition to changing the bylaws so that what we get in the
Mhm.
future is better than what we have now?
That's a great point, and I think that's fully in the scope of our work, and maybe also part of the reason of engaging some of those HOAs, because they can make some on the ground improvements, or just think about how they can be implemented into a subdivision that already exists. So I appreciate you drawing my attention to that, and let's check back on it the next time we're here and just make sure that we are sort of sufficiently thinking about improvements in existing development in addition to new development.
And then that reminds me of another thing that
Okay, great.
idea that came up is when you were talking about the current committees or organizations.
Yeah.
The Hopkinton Garden Club was one that came to mind
Okay.
because if you're talking about rain gardens and things like that, I think that would be a great resource for residents to be able to go and say, if I have this area that floods near the catch basin or whatever that I control, is there something I can do to
Yeah.
plant to help with the flooding and things
Yeah.
of that nature?
Super, great idea. I can see them fitting in a couple different places, so I appreciate that. Thank you. Go ahead, Michael.
Hey, so yeah, no, I think this is great. So most of the stuff that you talked about sounded like it was pretty low cost, I would say. But since you've done this for multiple towns, and I'm sure you've kind of dove into the literature of this, do you have like a way you could break down some of the suggestions based on cost? An individual entity that's developing land or the town.
It's a good question. This might be a question for John as well. I don't think like a thorough cost benefit analysis isn't in the scope of our work, but part of what another sort of a subsequent line of inquiry that I had is how could we make sure this prioritization tool is really useful for you all in decision making, and perhaps like thinking about, while CBA isn't in our work, what could we do to help in any way provide some scale around what this might entail? So like picking up on some of those other priorities would be helpful, and we can do some creative thinking about what's possible.
I mean, anytime I think you can kind of, wrap back into, long-term savings that people will get by doing things more sustainably is going to really help sell it with the residents too. So,
yeah, and maybe that's a way that we don't have to go through the full analysis, but we can say this improvement could provide some, municipal saving, or really especially touch into that fiscal responsibility priority.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Did you have another discussion question?
I think that's sort of the line of thinking I had. So I appreciate the thinking from Michael. It was really around what's important for the planning board and prioritizing some of these updates. I mentioned a couple of the categories that we're thinking about around stormwater management, public safety, but curious if there's anything we're missing that would be really helpful for you all to think about as partners and really carrying the work on after this project completes. And you can like sit on it, and we can come back if nothing's coming up right now.
No, I just I don't have any epiphany of how to map
Okay.
the different types of emergency related events that would require FEMA intervention, how like specifically weather or dramatic weather events, what we could do in zoning. Like I think of the different type of extreme weather events that happen across the country and the world. You've got flooding, you've got drought, fire, extreme snow, and and I look at all of those, and maybe I'm missing some, but all hurricanes, wind, all of those are potential, and those potential situations are probably have going up and not going down. So I don't know how to prevent or zone or change our bylaws to mitigate those risks, and especially like Lucia said, we have a lot of homes and a lot of development that already exists.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure how to advise you on next steps, but hopefully there's a lot of smart people involved in your stakeholder groups that can help as well.
Thanks. I think, we could think about it. One of the impact categories is floodplain mitigation. It could be that we, without like over engineering this tool, so there's so much in there that's hard to wade through, but we could think about, are there other impact categories that aren't just floodplain mitigation that relate to climate risks and hazards as extreme events that could be part of the characterization?
Okay.
Awesome.
All right, Lucia, I think we all really appreciate you coming before the board, giving us a presentation. I think it will be nothing but beneficial for the town. So very excited about it.
I hope so. Yeah, thank you for listening and engaging in a really generous discussion. I appreciate it and glad to be here.
Awesome.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, we're gonna move on to our next agenda item. Continued public hearing, 0 Benson Road, amended definitive subdivision plan, Wayne Como. John, we've had this on our agenda many times. Could you just, from your perspective, like I know there was a new letter from what appears to be a new attorney from the Comos. I don't think anything has changed, but do you have any other perspective?
No, other than the letter that we received, I haven't spoken to the applicant, so I don't know if their plan has changed moving forward or if they are looking to do something else. So I don't know.
Okay. Mr. Brooks, would you like to speak on your client's behalf?
Well, I thought that might be useful. I do, for the record, I'm Peter Brooks and I represent the Comos in this application. The board received a letter from me. I trust they've received it and had a chance to review it on February 19th. I'd like to just briefly summarize the key points in that letter. It's kind of a lawyer's letter. It's not written in plain English, but maybe I can just summarize the gist of it. And then if there's any questions, I could address those questions. It seems to me, and I'm very new to this, but what I have learned in the last week or so is that the central issue seems to be whether the 2006 decision that approved a 2-lot subdivision and 2 building lots, whether that decision contained a condition that the Comos gift one of those.
Mr. Brooks, you went on mute. Is anyone else hearing him?
I can
We
hear
can
him.
hear him.
I don't appear
Did you
to
lose
be-
your headphones, Rob? Can you hear us, Rob?
Yep, sorry about that. I don't know what happened.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I was saying that the question is whether there was a condition contained in that 2006 decision that a gift be made. And if that was a condition, whether the failure to complete that gift renders Lot 3 unbuildable so as to warrant the denial of the pending application. And our position, quite simply, is that there is no condition contained in that decision that required that this gift be made. Certainly, this board back in 2006 contemplated that the gift would be made. I think certainly the proposed gift to Halt was a reason for the waivers, and in particular, the waiver on the limitation of dead-end streets. We all understand, that it was a reason, and it was a very important reason in approving that subdivision back in 2006. But it wasn't stated as a condition. There was nothing in that decision that said that the Comeaus shall gift this lot to Halt or to anyone else. No other language was used in that decision that made the gift compulsory. And the law, some of which I've cited in my letter, is very clear that if a board wants to regulate the future conduct of a subdivision owner, it has to be stated as a condition in that decision. All the decision says in this case is that the Comeaus intended to donate Lot 3, which they did. They did intend that. They had an agreement to do that, and they fully intended to complete that gift when that was discussed back in 2006. But the circumstances changed. Those circumstances changing had nothing to do with the Comeaus. Halt's interest in Lot 3 was not just in Lot 3. It was the adjoining land known as the Davenport parcel, which was open space at the time. And Halt was looking at the possibility of joining the Comeaus Lot 3 with the Davenport parcel to create a much larger open space in the town. When the Davenport parcel was approved for development, Halt no longer had any interest in Lot 3. It isn't in their interest or in their plan to acquire single isolated lots. They were looking to create a much larger open space, and it was Halt that declined the gift and suggested to the Comeaus that they just make a financial contribution of $1,000 in lieu of that agreement to make the gift, and the Comeaus did that. Now, one of the things that has struck me in the week or so I've been looking at this is the suggestion by the abutter that somehow the Comeaus engaged in some grand scheme to dupe the board back in 2006. Suggestion they never intended to make this gift. And that's just wrong. It's offensive, and it's not supported by the facts. The reason this gift did not occur was because Halt no longer wanted the land. The Comeaus have paid property taxes on this lot, assessed as a building lot, for almost 20 years now. It was approved by the board as a building lot. There was no requirement that it be maintained as open space, and there was no requirement by the board that it be conveyed to Halt. So our position really quite simply is we understand it was a reason for the approval, but the board didn't make it a condition, and therefore you cannot now at this point in time say, well, yes, it was a condition and we're going to deny this application, effectively rescinding the approval of Lot 3 as a building lot. As I said in my letter, I'm sure the board is aware, the subdivision control law prohibits a planning board from requiring a property owner to contribute their land or some portion of their land for some public purpose without compensating that property owner. And in this case, I think the board, if it denies this application because the gift was not made, would be doing exactly that. It would be effectively rescinding the prior approval of Lot 3 because the Comeaus failed to donate a portion of their land for some public purpose. I think that is the Young case that I cited in my letter. It's a very similar situation and basically said that you have to compensate the Comeaus if you're going to require, as a condition to subdivision approval, that they donate some portion of their land for some public purpose. The final thing I would like to say, I don't know if this has already occurred, but I would really urge the board before it makes a decision to obtain some outside legal counsel on this issue. I think the board is considering action that may expose the town to some substantial legal liability and costs. And I think before you go down that path, having town council look at this, look at my letter, look at those cases, and give the board some good legal advice about what they can and cannot do here.
Does at this time, thank you, Mr. Brooks. I'd like to open it up to the board for any comments, questions. From my perspective, nothing's changed. Does anyone on the board have any comments, questions, or opinions? Parker, go ahead.
I'm not opposed to the suggestion we clear this with town council, or have them take a look, because my understanding is that there's some consideration to look at. I think it's called implied consideration for approvals, that conditions must be explicit, but that there sometimes can and should be an approval based on an understanding that the public benefit would be provided. And so, there's, in the letter, talks about acknowledging, and I think Mr. Brooks acknowledges, that there's waivers granted were influenced by the expected donation, and that we granted the waivers in reliance on that donation, or not we, but the board previously. But that we just make sure that we are within the boundaries of what would be considered implied consideration. That'd be something I'd be interested in.
Thanks, Parker. Matthew, go ahead.
So Mr. Brooks raises some interesting points, and reading all the documents, I do have one question. So I think we're all in agreement that the board in 2006 approved the necessary waivers that eventually approved the plan based on the representation of Mr. Comeau, that, as it's written in the document, the applicant will donate one of the two building lots. I have a question that if we, given that that never happened, and that seems like a material change and a material misrepresentation of what would happen, what happens if the decision's rescinded, if the plan's rescinded? Is that just a physical road that doesn't exist legally at that case, or what's the end result?
Well, I think the end, if you're asking me, I think the end result.
I was asking Rob. I
Okay.
assumed that maybe the town planner could answer.
John, do you have any? I don't know, but John, do you have any thoughts on that question?
So if you rescind a subdivision, definitive subdivision plan, it doesn't impact the lots that are mortgaged or sold in good faith. So the Como's property, the one that they live on, would not be impacted, but the road essentially would no longer exist. And the currently unbuilt lot, the open space designated lot, would be non-buildable because there's no frontage. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you.
I think this process started with our the Hopkinton's zoning enforcement officer sending a letter to the Comos that lot couldn't be built on because of this prior decision. So that's the starting point for this discussion, and that's what brought it to the planning board to see if we wanted to amend the prior decision. I don't know. That's where I think we are, but anyone else on the board have any comments, questions? Mr. Antonellis, I see you're on. Would you like to make a comment?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity, and I've had the opportunity to review Attorney Brooks's letter, which he was kind enough to send directly to me, and I appreciate the effort that he made in that regard. I think his fundamental understanding of the law regarding exacting land by planning boards taking actions to exact land for public purposes is correct. I think his research is fairly comprehensive in that regard. However, I do think that the cases that he cite all speak from the point where the planning board has requested that the applicant provide the open space, a lot. In one of the cases, he referenced a playground lot or a field lot. And in this particular case, the history of it that predates the actual approval in 2006 is that the Comos made a couple of efforts to extend the cul-de-sac or to get approval and were unsuccessful, and then came back to the board with a plan that they instituted, which was to see if the board would agree that the grant of this lot 3, would meet the test of creating an exceptional circumstance from which the board could then justify the grant of the multitude of waivers that were requested. And I think this board recognizes that the significant request for the waivers included not building an extension to the cul-de-sac. So functionally, the Comos have access to a cul-de-sac and have what I'll call imaginary frontage because the roadway was never built there. Same thing would be true of lot 3. So while Attorney Brooks may be correct that a planning board does not have the authority under Massachusetts general laws to require a developer to set aside land for open space. In this particular case, it was not the planning board's idea, it was the applicant's idea. And I think that is an important point throughout this process. The statement by Attorney Brooks that there was some scheme intended, I frankly was confused and continue to be confused why the time period between the approval and the letter from Halt saying we don't want the land was approximately 10 years. And I just wonder why it was that it took 10 years to go to Halt to give them the deed. Whatever the reasons were, if it was simply forgetting, they paid, as Attorney Brooks said, they paid taxes on it every year. So obviously they were aware that they still owned it, but they never went to Halt until 10 years down the road. I find that to be somewhat confusing. And then secondly, on top of that, Attorney Brooks and prior counsel before him have talked about the fact that Halt was only interested in this property because it was also interested in the Davenport parcel. Well, what we don't know is whether or not the grant of this lot, when it was originally intended to be made, may have effectuated something different about the Davenport parcel. So if we're going to bring up the Davenport instance, I think that it's incumbent on the board to find out the process that took place there and why conveniently at this point we're talking about Davenport when no one was talking about Davenport in 2006. I've read the record of the 2006 hearings, and I don't find a mention to additional parcels. And again, I think that you have almost, to use the term, you have a quid pro quo here. You needed to find exceptional circumstances to extend a cul-de-sac beyond what the town requires. And those exceptional circumstances were supported by the offering of a gift of land, not the requirement. I think that if we're all going to speculate conclusions, I think it's just as easy to speculate that had the Comos not offered the land, that their 2006 application may have found the way of their earlier applications, which was a denial.
Thank you, Mr. Antonellis. I think it's very compelling. Does anyone on the board have any other questions for either attorney? So before we move this forward, I guess I'd like a straw poll opinion of the board. Does the board think this require, or should we try to pass this to town council for review before moving forward? Can I just, I'm just gonna go around my list here and get your opinion. Lucia. Actually, Elise, sorry, I went out of order.
That's all right. I would like to hear council's opinion, our thoughts on this.
Lucia?
I'm wondering if John has any input on that.
How so?
Has this been brought to town council?
No, so we usually, if something is before the board, we wait for the board to request town council, because otherwise we've got to pay for town council advice that no one's requested. So if the board would like me to go to town council about this, I certainly can, but I have not up until this point.
Okay, so then through the chair, my follow-up would be your findings. If it were the case that you thought it appropriate for the planning board to go to town council, is that something that you would include in your comments?
In the memo?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, the principal planner comments regarding this particular hearing.
I think it's always a good idea to go to town council on stuff like this, but it's not, I don't think I explicitly made it a suggestion, but that doesn't mean I explicitly don't think it's a good idea either.
Okay. Yeah, I just wasn't sure because we haven't come across this in the short time that I've been on the board. So I would say yes.
All right. I think everyone's going to say yes. Matthew, go ahead.
So I'm not opposed to town council taking a look at it, especially since it sounds like it's potentially would come before the town council anyway. But I think it's clear that the material representation that was made by the applicant never manifested, and whether willful or not, it sounds like it's not relevant to the subdivision control laws. So I not only do I think that this should be disapproved, I also think we should have a public hearing about rescinding the original subdivision.
I agree that in your opinion about this this proposed amendment. Michael, go ahead.
Yeah, I would be comfortable voting tonight. I don't think we need town council's input, but if the rest of the board wants it, you know, obviously I would defer to that.
Parker.
I never broke 160 on my LSAT and would like a real lawyer to look at this.
All right, Jane.
I wouldn't be opposed to not going forward tonight with the vote.
Karen.
I think it's a good idea to put it in front of town council, just as a review.
All right, and Vic.
Not opposed to it. So it can go to the town council.
All right. I think that's more than 50%. So the majority would and I think I don't think it's a bad idea getting town council's input. I think they I would be surprised if there's an outcome that's not in line with my thinking, but it's better to be safe on this one. Procedurally, Mr. Brooks, are you and your applicant okay with us continuing this public hearing to our next meeting?
Yes, we are.
All right, John, so in terms of the process, like to get town council's input, you're just gonna contact them, and that's how we do these things. Is the request for input goes through John to our town council. Like I don't make it directly, or the board does it. It goes through John, and he does. But when do we need to continue? What's our next meeting?
So our next meeting is March 10th and then March 24th.
Do you think, I don't know, like, do we think the town council will have feedback by March 10th?
We can try. If not, then we can always request a continuation on March 10th, but
all right, let's do that.
I would hope so. I don't know what their workload is like, so I can't.
Yeah, I get it.
Can't vote on that. But so if we continue to March 10th, then I would recommend you continue the decision. I think we've been doing 2 weeks, so that would be to March 24th. The decision.
All right. Before we move forward, Matthew has his hand raised. Go ahead, Matthew.
Yeah, I guess I'm curious if what the full scope and context do you want to ask of town council? Do you want to ask about both decisions or just apropos of this amendment? Or
I think since we're going the route of asking town council, like I think we want to know about both. Now that you brought that up, we want to know, is there any reason we should be compelled to amend the prior decision? And because the gift never occurred, is the prior decision still valid? So or should that be rescinded? I think those two questions should be asked.
Thank you.
All right, at this time, I'd like to entertain a motion that we continue the public hearing for 0 Benson Road to March 10th and continue the decision deadline for this to March 24th, 2025.
And through the chair, just to be clear, did the applicant okay that both those dates?
Mr. Brooks, are you okay with those dates?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay. All right, roll call vote.
So we didn't actually move, but so moved.
Sorry. Go ahead. Would
Need a
anyone
second.
like to?
Yeah, Matthew moved, seconded.
All right, thank you, everybody. Roll call vote. Elise Mayalowski,
Yes.
Lucia Lopez,
Yes.
Matthew Ronca,
Yes.
Michael King,
Yes.
Parker Happ,
Yes.
Jane Moran,
Yes.
Karen Wills,
Yes.
Vikasath Prati,
Yes.
and Rob Benson is a yes. All right, I think it's good. I think it'll be good just to get our town council's opinion on this, and it'll help us move forward one way or another. All right. I'm looking at our agenda at this point, and at this point, we have no further things on our agenda for this evening. So I'd like to entertain a motion to adjourn tonight's planning board meeting.
So moved.
Second.
All right, roll call vote. Elise Mailowski,
Yes.
Lucia Lopez,
Yes.
Matthew Ronca,
Yes.
Michael King,
Yes.
Parker Hap,
Yes.
Jane Moran,
Yes.
Karen Wills,
Yes.
Vikasath Prati,
Yes.
and Rob Benson is yes. All right, thanks, everybody. Good meeting.
Thank
All right.
you.
Bye.
Bye.